to be making a very popular recipe that I found on the internet called Grandma Johnson's Scones. It's the first time I've ever made this recipe, so if I can make it and it turns out good, you can too. The first step of this recipe is to mix 1 cup of sour cream in with 1 teaspoon of baking soda. You put it in a small bowl and then you set that aside. So I'm going to do the sour cream first. Now make sure you really push it down in there and that you don't leave any gaps, because 1 cup means 1 exact full cup. Okay, I would say that's about 1 cup. Then it says to preheat the oven to 350 and lightly grease a large baking sheet. But since I'm using a darker baking sheet, I'm only going to go to 325. I just want to let you know, earlier I did already make a mistake. For the 1 cup of sour cream, you're supposed to mix it with a teaspoon of baking soda, and I did powder. But luckily this recipe calls for baking powder and baking soda, so I'm just going to switch them and see if it works out. But note, it is baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking soda with this, not powder. After you mix your baking soda with the sour cream, set out 1 cup of butter, which is 2 sticks. So you set out your butter and let it soften. Or you can do this before you even start anything if you'd like. Or, like me, who always forgets to soften it, you can use a microwave. Now for the other part of the ingredients, you have to mix in a large bowl 4 cups of flour and then 1 cup of white sugar. Here's 1 cup of flour. 2. 3. 4. And 1 cup of sugar. I like to use a smaller cup and put it into the bigger cup, especially when it gets low. One cup of sugar. Okay, now you should put in 2 teaspoons of baking powder. But earlier, since I messed up and put in powder, I'm gonna put in the soda now. Earlier it should be 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and now it should be 2 teaspoons of baking powder. But I messed up, so I'm gonna reverse them, which might not work, but we'll see. So I'm using soda, but this should be baking powder. It should be 2 teaspoons baking powder, not soda. But since you're mixing it all together eventually, I'm hoping it's still going to work out. But we'll see. And you need 1/4 teaspoon cream of tartar. Oops. Gotta level that off. And you need a teaspoon of salt. Now remember that butter we set out earlier? Mine's still a little cold, so I'm gonna microwave it to soften it. But now you gotta cut in the soft butter into this. If you have a pastry cutter, this is perfect for cutting in. If not, you can just use a fork to press it in, but since I have a, it's also called a dough blender, since I have a dough blender, it's going to be perfect. 1 cup of butter, which is 2 sticks. Ooh, a little melty on me there. Now you gotta cut this in. Probably gonna need a butter knife, because if your butter isn't super good still, super easy to cut into, it's gonna stick a little bit. So you're gonna have to cut it off, or help pry it off, or push it through. As you can see now, my butter's starting to get tinier and tinier, mix in with everything. I'm also having a lot come off to the sides here, so make sure your bowl is big enough. You're going to want to stop once your sticks of butter are pretty tiny. Pea size, a little bigger honestly. They don't have to be super tiny. But really just make sure you mix everything together pretty well. That's what matters with this recipe. At least I think. I mean, this is the first time I've made it, and I've already messed up, so hopefully it turns out well. And if you follow this at home, and don't make the same mistake I did, it'll probably turn out even better. Make sure your bowl's pretty big too. This is the biggest bowl I got, and it can barely contain everything. Now, according to the recipe, mixing this together is going to turn it into a dough. And hopefully it should get a little tinier as it clumps together, but we'll see. Also make sure your butter's pretty melted, pretty soft. That'll help with the dough quite a bit. When your dough comes together, it says to roll it out onto, or turn it out onto a lightly floured surface, which means you don't have to use a whole lot of flour, but you know, enough so that it won't stick. Mine's starting to come together, but I'm just going to use my hands. At this point, I'm sick of using this wooden spoon. And then make sure you spread your dough around. And it says to roll it out into a 3/4 of an inch thick circle. And then from there, cut it into 12 wedges, and then you're going to bake the wedges. So, alright, now that it's come together pretty decently, I'm going to turn it out onto the flour. And like I said earlier, knead it really quick, just for like a minute. And then after that, I'm going to roll it into a circle about 3/4 inch thick, and then cut it into 12 wedges, which, you know, if you took math as a kid, triangles. So, knead it for a little bit. The flour helps it from, you know, not sticking. You can add raisins before you get to this point, as you're mixing it, if you like raisins. But I just had raisins today, so I really don't want them in my scones. So.
Huh?
So you roll it out, 3/4 inch. I mean, you could just guess that. This isn't, you know, rocket science. Doesn't have to be perfect. But normally for doughs and stuff, you need them a lot longer. But this kind of dough, just a quick. Try to roll it into a circle as you knead it. Or, I mean, as you roll it. So 3/4 inch is pretty thin, but it's not as thin as like you would do for cookies, unless you were doing really thick cookies. I would say, honestly, this is probably even under 3/4 inch thick, but this is good enough. And then to not cut your counter, only very lightly cut it with a butter knife or something of the sort. You don't even have to cut all the way through. And I'm not even doing 12. I'm doing 8. So, then remember the pan you sprayed earlier? Take them, rip them apart since you cut them a little, put them on there, flop them on. Now remember, first with the sour cream, baking soda, not baking powder. I did opposites. I replaced the soda with the powder and the powder with the soda. So I'm going to see if mine turn out okay. But I don't think it'll make a big difference. But yours should turn out better when you try this. Alright, you put them in the oven for 12 to 15 minutes. But I'm just going to check them at 9 and just from there go every 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, it's been actually about 12 or 13 minutes and these look about done. I sprinkled some cinnamon sugar on top, kind of sporadically. One way to tell if they're done, according to the recipe I used, was it says on the bottom they will be golden brown, like these are. So you can take them out once they're brown on the bottom, set them off to the side, and just let them cool. My only problem is these might be a little too thick, and of course I switched the baking powder and baking soda, but otherwise I'll taste them in a little bit and tell you how they are. Well, even with my baking powder, baking soda switch up, they still turned out pretty good, huh?
Yeah, they're really good.
And I'm really messy.
There you go.